Hi, it's Boyd Neal, and just so you know that you're listening to the right video, this is CDPR114 at Ryerson University, and the unit that we're talking about today is crisis communications. In particular, I'm going to provide you with some feedback about the discussion board comments and contributions with respect to the Arla Foods case, and also to make some general statements about crisis communications and the role of public relations professionals in managing what is often called strategic communication when the stakes are the highest. The Arlo Foods case is 5 or 6 years old, and I think it evidences many of the important lessons that we need to take into account when thinking about crisis communications. I'm not going to summarize the case because my assumption is you all read it, and indeed the contributions on discussion board from at least 19 of you were excellent. There's some comments missing, and I hope that people nevertheless listen to this video, even if they didn't contribute to the discussion. Some of the core lessons that I think you can learn from the Arla Foods case are quite simply, first of all, know your social and political risks and vulnerabilities. I think it's fair to say that the company in question here didn't have a solid sense of what its risks were in the circumstance or with respect to the particular issue about the Danish cartoons. The second is be prepared. A crisis will happen to you even if you have been operating successfully and uneventfully for 40 years, as is the case here. The third is that you have to identify and analyze issues often so that you may be able to prevent a crisis, or that at least you put yourself in a better position by aligning your stakeholders' interests in your favor to the extent that you can. That's the benefit of doing ongoing issue analysis, is you can be determining who are the stakeholders that you need to have a most close relationship with, and who it is that you need to be keeping up to date on what your point of view is on various issues. And then finally, I think one of the core lessons is the need for response speed in terms of analysis, decision making, and your ability to pull together your crisis team and determine what your strategy is. There's a couple of other things that I think are critical about the Arla Foods case, and many of these you raised in your discussion. Perhaps not in the same way I'm going to express them, but that's fine. I think you've captured, in general, in the discussion, the core of the lessons to be learned here. The second is you must, as a company, write your own narrative in a crisis. You can't wait for government, stakeholders, opposition, or the media to put your issue into their story frame. You have to create your own frame. This is the benefit, this is the problem that happens frequently when legal counsel gets involved. They believe that you can't say anything until you have all the facts. Well, of course, you never have all the facts in a crisis. But the main reason that this is such bad advice, if you like, or advice that needs to be taken critically, is that while you're waiting for facts, other people are telling the story. Other people are positioning you in relation to whatever the events or issues are. The third thing that I think is really important is that you have to target your stakeholders. The media and even the public are often not the most important audience for you in a crisis. It may seem as if that's the case when you're dealing with something like the European preoccupation with these Danish cartoons that are the center of the Arla Foods case. But the fact of the matter is that if you have relationships with other people, such as religious leaders, governments, NGOs, advocacy groups, then perhaps you can talk directly to them and have them help you determine what approach you should take to ensure that you are taking a point of view on the issue that will find support among vocal stakeholders, who then in turn can be your supporters in a crisis or in an event. The fourth thing, and it was raised in the discussion, is that apologies are often critical to the success of crisis management. But in this case, for example, you have to be apologizing for the right thing. You have to know what it is that the public thinks and stakeholders think is what you've done wrong. So you have to, in this case, frame your apology in the context of what they think where you have made mistakes according to them. So that's not to be confused with the overall narrative, which you have to frame. But when it comes to the apology, make sure you're framing the right apology, responding to the right assessment of what your mistakes have been, if any, in the situation. The fifth thing is that some of you, interestingly, and I think I'm pleased to see it, given, as you know, I believe the social web has changed everything about what we do, especially crisis communication. Many of you mentioned that Arla Foods should have a social web strategy, which, of course, in the time frame of the case, which was about 8 years ago, was not a viable tool, or weren't viable tools, rather. Social media didn't really exist. There were blogs, yes, but Facebook and Twitter, for example, didn't exist in 2005, or if they did, I can't recall exactly. They were in their baby phase. However, the sentiment is right, since if this were to happen to a company today, and the company had its own active social platforms, it could tell a compelling and persuasive story using those platforms. So while historically, recommendations for Arla Foods to act by using the social web are a little ahistorical, out of place. Nevertheless, the sentiment is right. And then a final issue that was discussed in the 3 questions I posed on the discussion board is the behavior of Nestle and Carrefour. From my perspective, and many of you recognize that this was the case, they were both opportunistic and driven to seek marketing advantage by the situation. I think that's a very dangerous point of view to take in a crisis. What you're looking to do is not to use a crisis as a marketing advantage, not to take a public statement or make a public statement that attempts to position you with consumers so you can try and steal some competitive advantage. In the short run, it may have provided a business edge. In the long run, though, it may have been short-sighted. It likely reinforced criticism, which has been leveled against the 2 companies, Nestle and Carrefour, of a certain amount of moral weakness. I tend to agree with the quote from Hersey Alley that it represented, to some extent, cowardice. As she points out, and liberty, and as Hersey Alley knows personally, given all the things that have happened to her in her life, liberty does not come cheap. And it's not, or companies can't always take a strong social position on issues when it comes to something like this circumstance. Certainly don't try and take marketing advantage of it. Don't be opportunistic. I think it's fair to say, just in conclusion, that if you looked at the 10 crisis communications missteps that Durley and Garcia talk about in the chapter in reputation management, their 10 missteps are right on the money. And you could have used them as an analytic framework to go through the Arla Foods case. Just as an example, among the 10 that stand out that are perfectly applicable to the Arla Foods case is, first, don't ignore the problem. In other words, don't be surprised that you're pulled into a crisis, and the way in which you can prevent yourself from being surprised by a crisis is to manage issues properly, track issues, manage them, do the political and social risk analysis. The second thing is, don't deny the severity of the problem. Don't, as happened with Arla Foods, look on it just as a pure case of ensuring security for employees going to and from work. Think of it broadly. That was compartmentalizing the problem, which is their third misstep. It's thinking that it's only going to be restricted to the question of whether or not their employees will be safe, when in fact it became a much broader social and political issue. So there are many others. Don't overconfess, for example. Don't give in to panic and paralysis, all of which I think provide a useful framework within which to assess the Arla Foods case. So those are my comments. Again, if you have anything that you would like to add to that discussion, you can always post them on the discussion board. But thank you for a reasonably active discussion on the discussion board, and I think it's fair to say that you covered most of the major points.